Just a moment here. There we go. Mike's looking okay, although apparently I need to set the levels up a little bit higher. Nonetheless, good evening. Welcome to Shop Talk. You can see it's not going to be a crowded group tonight. Unfortunately, the co-hosts weren't able to co-host, so we're going to go solo for tonight. Nonetheless, I'm going to keep saying nonetheless because I think it's a pretty decent preposition. I think it works. It's definitely a top 30 preposition. And we're going to continue. We will move forward. We will introduce Shop Talk. In case this is your first time here, welcome to Shop Talk. Basically, every second Monday, we like to get together. We, in this case, being me and the mouse in my pocket, because the rest of the crew not able to make it tonight, but that's okay. We soldier on. But we get together, we chat about things like what's going on in the technical world, especially in the data platform world. And this week there is some interesting, exciting stuff going on in the SQL Server world, which is my first topic, and that'll show up in just a moment. But the other part of Shop Talk, the part that may be actually really relevant tonight, is this is also a chat-driven type of program. So the idea is that if you've got questions, technical questions, overall high-level questions, things that I can bloviate on for like a good 10-minute clip, get those in chat, and that would be fantastic. That would actually help out a lot. And also, hopefully help you out, because I'll probably be answering a question, and it may even be a correct answer. With that, let's get the show going. So I would say the biggest topic in the SQL Server world, and thankfully, for the moment, we can talk about the SQL Server world as opposed to why Kevin doesn't like generative AI nearly as much as what everybody else apparently likes. We have information from the SQL Server blog, and I'm going to drop the link in chat here, so if you want to follow along, you're welcome to. But what is going on? Well, SQL Server 2025 release candidate 0 is out. It actually came out August 22nd, so that was on Friday. And I think it's just in time. It's a pretty decent set of updates, patches, and things that we've been kind of waiting for a little bit. So there is a new mechanism for feature opt-in. And historically, what we've done is that we've had trace flags. So you would set a trace flag on, and with that trace flag being on, it would say, okay, you now can use this feature. This was very common in private previews. This is very common in other circumstances where sometimes I don't necessarily want that functionality to be out for the general public, but for certain parties, we do want this to be available. And to that end, we have historically used trace flags, but now there is a preview features database scoped configuration. And that database scoped configuration is what's going to allow you to tell SQL Server, yes, I want to use this particular feature, or no, I don't want to use that particular feature. So I think that'll be a little bit cleaner and a little bit clearer than what we had to do historically around trace flags, many of which are undocumented. So you have trace flag 5408 enabled, and then the question is, well, what is 5408? Actually, I don't know. I made that number up. But if it is a real trace flag, I don't know what it is. I'd have to go look it up. If it's a real trace flag that is not documented, well, maybe somebody's written about it, but there's no official documentation on the topic. And so if that's on for your server, then you might ask, well, why is it on? And if you don't know the answer and there's nobody else who knows the answer, that can be a really tricky question to try to solve. And then if you stand up a new server, do I need trace flag 5408? Well, I don't know. I don't even know what it is, much less if I need it or not. So this is the challenge. Whereas you can have let me actually go to the link on the what's new in the preview, because it also shows how the feature flags operate. And as I scroll down through here just a little bit, we have release candidate 0. So coming down, there are quite a few updates, and actually I'm going to talk about this one for a little bit, but I just want to focus specifically on the feature. Let me see what that pattern exactly was. Preview underscore features. To learn more, review the release notes. Okay, preview features, database scope credentials. So preview features applies to SQL Server 2025 and later, as well as Azure SQL Database or the Microsoft Fabric SQL Database, which is in preview because most features in Microsoft Fabric will be in preview for like 8 years before they come into general availability. That's mild hyperbole on my part. Mild hyperbole. Although they have done a lot better in the past few months of taking stuff that's been in private or in public preview for like 2 years, almost literally 2 years in some cases, and making it available, making it generally available so that it actually has full support. So they're doing better on that front. But basically, we have this preview features, and to learn more, here's another link. But the default is off. So these are not features that you would necessarily want to turn on in a production environment, but you might want to do it in dev just to learn a little bit more. So what we have currently as preview features, AI generate chunks, so you can generate chunks of text given a specific language model. Change event streaming, which allows you to stream changes from a SQL Server instance to an Azure Event Hub. And that would be helpful for things like I want to have Kafka topic populated based off of my changes, or I want to be able to investigate those operations in near real time and analyze them without having to consistently write a bunch of queries. Or I'm logging information to a data lake. I want to write it out to the data lake without having to write big ETL operations that copy roughly the same data over and over. So pretty useful. Creating vector indexes. This is an approximate index on a vector column for approximate nearest neighbor searching. Vector search, searching for vectors, so using the approximate nearest neighbor's vector search algorithm. And create external models. So you can create local Onyx models hosted on your file system as opposed to going out to OpenAI or Perplexity or something. So you can see, even in this episode of Shop Talk, I still can't get away from generative AI topics because that's what most of the features are in this particular release of the release candidate that are marked as preview features. The interesting question is going to be, how many of these features that are currently marked as preview are going to make it as regular features in RTM? And I don't know the answer to that, if all of them will, if none of them will, if some of them will. I would speculate some, probably most, and that the rest probably would come in a later CU. Just based off of history, based off of what we've seen from prior releases of SQL Server and the rough percentage of preview features or introductory features that make it to the big time as of the release date. Because knowing that RC0, we have it right now, that this is late August of 2025, well, usually you'll have RC0, RC1, you might have an RC2, and these are generally spaced about a month out. So what I would expect is we'll probably have RC1 sometime in late September. I don't anticipate an RC2 because I kind of expect that SQL Server 2025 will go out as at big Microsoft conference that just happens to be in November. And we've joked about this for quite some time that this is probably when that release date is going to be. I have zero insider information, so I just want to make that perfectly clear. I am not basing that off of anything that I've heard from anybody or have anything that is secretive info. This is just, if you go back and look at pretty much every release of SQL Server since I have had a grown-up job, they've all come out at major conferences, whether that's Ignite or Past Summit or something along those lines. They've always had a major release right around that time. Maybe SQL Server 2005 didn't have a release at that time, and that was before I had big boy jobs. So that one doesn't count. But yeah, 2005 was probably the exception to the rule. That was the one where we need to get this thing out. It's mid to late December. We've just got to ship it, and in Service Pack 1, we're going to release the rest of the features that we didn't get done. So cut it off, ship a product. That way we don't release SQL Server 2005 in the year 2006, because that would be really embarrassing. And similar principle applies to every other year-numbered version of SQL Server, where they're going to release it in the year of question, because otherwise it would be pretty embarrassing. So that's all my rough speculation. And knowing what we've seen from the past 5 SQL Server releases, RC0 definitely, RC1 almost assuredly. I think even 2017 had an RC1, but I'd have to go back and check. RC2, sometimes they have it, sometimes they don't. If they do have one, it would be my guess would be a mid-October, late October type of release. So there's probably just enough of a time window if they do roughly 4-week releases between the release candidates to squeeze in an RC2 if they need it. But it may turn out that they say, no, we're good. We'll release RC1, then we'll have RTM. We'll all sit back and see. Knowing this, we probably have somewhere around 10 weeks before we're going to get copies of SQL Server 2025 available to us, and sit back and enjoy the ride in the meantime. So let's go back to what's going on, what's new in this release candidate. I mentioned preview features, and that is neat. That is brand new functionality. We've never had this before in SQL Server in this fashion. I mean, like I said, we've had trace flags, but this is a bit different. This is going to be a database scoped configuration, and when we think about that, that also means it's not an instance level thing. These are database level things typically. So we might have vector indexes in one database, but not in another database. So that might be kind of interesting when you're thinking about backing up and restoring databases, or when you're thinking about what types of operations, what types of configurations do you have for that SQL Server database. Might be kind of interesting to think about in that regard. As far as what's new in RC0, generative AI stuff, vector search and index, you can create vector indexes, you can execute vector searches, but again, you have to turn on the preview feature for that. So this is not something you're going to get for free right out of the box without writing one line of T-SQL. But it also means that if you don't want vector search or vector indexes, you're not enabling that code. And then if there is a bug with vector search or vector indexes, it's less likely that your database is going to experience that bug. There is text chunking and Onyx model integration, so you can support local Onyx models. There is better metadata, like sys.vector indexes follows established naming convention and inherits columns from sys.indexes. Some of that just feels like this is just good practice of probably people in the community said, hey, why is this DMV very different from sys.indexes? Why are you creating something that's totally special? Couldn't it just have something similar so that a developer or a database administrator who's very familiar with sys.indexes can just go over to vector indexes and get an idea of what's going on? But stuff that's more interesting to me, maybe because I'm a weirdo, probably because I'm a weirdo, but Linux support. Ubuntu 24.04 LTS. This is something, one of the most popular videos that I've done on YouTube is actually 2 videos. One is Ubuntu 20.04 on SQL Server. That was 2019. And the other one was Ubuntu 22.04 on SQL Server 2022. And the latter took quite a while before Ubuntu 22.04 was officially supported on SQL Server 2022. So technically, you could find a way to rig a solution. But in each version of Ubuntu, there are different libraries. There are things like SSL libraries or TLS libraries. There are C++ compilation libraries. There are a variety of different libraries that are the standard for a particular release of Ubuntu. And the next version will have things that are different. but SQL Server will expect specific versions of specific libraries, and they will fail. The installation or the operation will fail because it's missing that particular version of that particular library. This is important because libraries do change. There's no promise of backwards compatibility with future library versions. And as a result, SQL Server, an enterprise database solution that's expected to run, and if it's installed and if it's configured correctly, it's going to run. And if it doesn't run, then that's a problem. So this is not some fairly simplistic, hey, I rigged this together and maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. If it doesn't work, haha, oh well, just try something else. This is more of, I'm paying a lot of money for this product, or I'm using Developer Edition, or somebody in my company might be paying a lot of money for this product, and I expect it to work. Not, I expect it to work unless you have a later version of Ubuntu, in which case we'll just get arbitrary failing. So for that reason, Microsoft is very clear about which versions of operating systems they officially support, and implicit in that is the versions of libraries that those operating systems support are going to be pinned down. It's going to be these specific versions of libraries because we need those exact things, because there are differences between the different versions of these different libraries. So accordingly, we're going to need to wait until Microsoft makes official that, yeah, you can support this, or we can support this, you can run this version of Ubuntu and SQL Server together, and they'll play nicely. And it takes a while. As we see, 2404 is now going to be supported on SQL Server 2025. And that's roughly a year and a half after 2404. 2404 was released, if I remember right, it was in May of 2024. Should have been in April, but there was a huge security flaw that we actually talked about on Shop Talk that pushed back the release of Ubuntu 2404 by just a little bit of time. It wasn't a huge bit of time. It was like, instead of late April, it was early May, something like that, as I recall. But this is nice because now if you are running Ubuntu 2404, then you can use SQL Server 2025. Alternatively, what I have suggested in the past for people who are running on the latest version of Ubuntu is, well, number one, if you don't need the latest version of Ubuntu, go back to the version that is officially supported and install that. Like if I need SQL Server on Linux running on bare metal or in a VM, I'm just going to install whatever version of Ubuntu I actually need. Now, in a lot of cases, the people doing this are running on their own personal desktops or laptops. They're just trying it out. They're goofing around. And I respect that. And in that case, it does kind of suck to tell somebody, well, reinstall your operating system and start from scratch. If you're talking about a server, yeah, I have fewer qualms about saying, reinstall your operating system and pick something that you're actually going to get support for, considering the amount of money you're probably paying for this product. But if it's someone goofing around on a laptop, the answer will be use a container. Get SQL Server in a container. It's going to be running on a version of Linux that Microsoft officially supports. And then you don't have to worry about whatever your version of the operating system is. Whatever the containerized operating system is will be officially supported by Microsoft. And then you do have to work through some of the mechanics of containers. You have to work through volumes and maintaining your databases and making sure that if the container fails or the containerization software fails in any fashion, that you've got built-in capabilities to self-heal or to resolve errors, or at least to spot the errors as they happen. Because administration on containers is an extra layer of complexity. Now, if you're using Kubernetes, that's like 3 extra layers of complexity, but if you set it up really well and you know what you're doing, or you have someone around who knows what they're doing, then you get some really nice gains out of it, narrowing it down to just a net of roughly 2 levels of complexity higher. So yeah, that's a full complexity gained. But that would be where I'd stand. So I'm happy that SQL Server 2025 is going to officially support Ubuntu 2404. That is the latest long-term support version of Ubuntu. I like seeing that Microsoft is still putting in some effort into the Linux-based SQL Server instances. I know that this is not a popular place to be. It's not something that's incredibly popular for companies that, oh, we just need to run SQL Server on Linux. But I like that they have it. I like that it's available. I like it's an option, and I would actually like to see more people use it, just so that it lasts longer. Now, I do think the fact that Windows containers died a horrible but totally worth it death, um, that does increase the likelihood that SQL Server on Linux lasts, just because if you want containers, you're running Linux-based containers. If you're running Windows-based containers, you have my condolences. And also, I mean, I'm not going to be totally rude and say, but why? But if you chose Windows-based containers, like if you're forced into it, hey, our company, we went on the Windows container ride back in like 2021, and we thought it was going to be really awesome, and everybody said that they were going to support it. Like Microsoft said, yeah, we're going to totally support Windows containers, and then they yanked the rug out from under us, but now we're stuck because we have all this legacy software that's running in Windows-based containers, and we can't do anything with it. I get you. I understand. That can be a pain. There might be ways around it. You might be able to transfer that to virtual machines. You might be able to do some things with it that will alleviate the need for having to use Windows containers. But I understand that there are companies that do have this problem. But you'll notice that SQL Server does not support Windows containers. And that should give you something to think about, that the SQL Server team cares so little about Windows containers, and rightfully so, because frankly, nobody cares about Windows containers anymore. Nobody of importance has cared about Windows containers in at least 4 years. I might push that to 6 years before we find somebody who actually really cared about Windows containers. I will not accept Microsoft caring about Windows containers, because it felt like they were supporting them for about 3 to 6 months, and then they said, nah, we're not really going to do this. So I don't consider that support. I consider that the classic, yeah, we're totally behind this. You know what? On second thought, we've changed our priority and decided that it is no longer relevant for us to be behind this, and therefore we're not going to be. I still feel bad about Spark.net. All right. So that's my yay for Ubuntu 24.04. Also, TLS 1.3 enabled by default. That's nice, because TLS 1.3 has been the standard, or is the new standard for secured connections. TLS 1.2 is the norm. This is the one that pretty much everybody should be using at this point. Yes, there are going to be companies where you're still on TLS 1.1, but you should be moving away from that. If you're in a cloud, your cloud provider has most likely moved you away from 1.1 and pushed you onto 1.2. 1.2 itself is not that new. 1.3 has been out and stable for a little while. So the fact that SQL Server A supports 1.3 and B is now pushing 1.3 as the default, I like that a lot. It can affect old libraries that don't support TLS 1.3. And so if you have some of those libraries, some of those drivers that do not support the newer version of TLS, then you can still use TLS 1.2. But I wouldn't go below 1.2. I would not go to 1.1. If you have a driver that does not support TLS 1.2, I think the question then becomes, what are you doing with that driver? What is your plan to move away from that driver or to update it? Because having a wildly inferior version of transport layer security is not a good long-term solution. Even if you have mitigating controls in place, there is a solid reason why everybody has migrated over to TLS 1.2 and why people are migrating over to TLS 1.3. And that is, it is very much a better protocol. So for that high-level hand-wavy reason, I'm being hand-wavy because I'd have to go Google exactly why it's a better protocol to give you correct answers as opposed to stuff that's off the top of my head, half of which is probably wrong. But I am willing to stand on the idea that, yeah, if you go in and dig in TLS 1.1 versus 1.2 versus 1.3, you're probably going to find out some pretty good argumentation for why. And actually, here, I just did a quick Google search. 1.3, why is this better and safer than TLS 1.2? And mind you, 1.2 itself was better than 1.1. There were some vulnerabilities in 1.1 that TLS 1.2 corrected. So you can see, as of August 2021, like you can see that TLS has been out or 1.3 has been out for 7 years. Released in August of 2018. It is now 7 years old. SQL Server is now supporting TLS 1.3. It's okay for some of these protocols to take a while to take form. I mean, like next year, everybody's going to be using IPv6 for everything, right? I'm pretty sure we've heard that since, I was in college. So TLS 1.3, it's not the most common form. 1.2 is going to be most widely used. If you use anything that's a AWS service or an Azure service, you're probably using TLS 1.2. But there are some cryptographic weaknesses that TLS 1.2 has. When they say a cryptographic weakness, this is the way to think about this is not there is a vulnerability such that somebody can decode your data. Instead, think of it as chipping away at a wall. So you have your wall of security, and your researchers, your cryptographers, your academics sitting in ivory towers with their pointy heads, they come up with algorithm that is fantastic. It's wonderful. It's amazing. It has 2,900 bits of encryption. And then they release it. And at the beginning, it's really great. Like, hey, there's no way that you can crack this in any reasonable amount of time. But what'll happen is that those algorithms are publicly available, and that's on purpose because we want people to try their best to undermine the algorithm. Because if you don't, then somebody is going to quietly undermine your algorithm and you won't know. Whereas if you make it public and you incentivize people to attempt to undermine, like other researchers, cryptographers who can put out papers and say, hey, I turned this 2,900 bits with this particular twist. Really, it's 2,840 bits. So I shaved off 60 bits. And that's what I mean by putting a chip in the wall. So you'll have one researcher who's got it to 2860 or 2840, and you'll have another one who knocks off another 20-30 bits, and you'll have another one that knocks off a few more. And then eventually you get to a point where adding up a bunch of these different small tweaks or imperfections in the algorithm or oddities in interpretation or casual substitutions that work 99% of the time but simplify the operations considerably. So instead of having 41,000 computational hours per bit, or again, I'm making up numbers for the purposes of trying to explain this, but instead of having that very strong computational power to decrypt or to brute force a message out of an encrypted envelope, you cut it down. You cut it down to a smaller amount, to a smaller amount, to a smaller amount, until at some point it becomes viable for powerful enough hardware to be able to decrypt a particular message in what we would consider a reasonable amount of time. And so we hit it from the avenue of researchers chipping away. We also hit it from the avenue of hardware being more impressive. This was where we had field programmable gate arrays, or FPGAs, that were a really interesting twist on the password cracking mechanisms of, like 15 to 20 years ago. because FPGAs, you could code them specifically to use particular algorithms much more efficiently than a general purpose computer, and you could have them go after certain types of algorithms much more efficiently than if you just had your desktop PC that was equally powerful trying to run this. And the other thing about FPGAs was you could have a large number of them for a quite reasonable amount of money hacking away at a particular problem. We see similar things with GPUs, where there was a bit of a resurgence in password cracking capabilities when people found out that, oh, this is a problem you can offload to a GPU. So instead of having your CPU try to brute force and go through this over and over, I can drop that off onto a GPU, which is faster at these types of mathematical operations, and I can have a bunch of GPUs linked together, all trying to solve these sorts of problems. So we have a few different ways of being able to reduce the practical security posture of a particular protocol. All right, so Marshall says the absolute nightmare that it was to get people to move off of TLS 1.0 and 1.1 is going to be just as bad as trying to get them off 1.2 when they really should do it. The number of companies who prefer to have a mentality of, if I don't touch it, then I just leave it and pray it'll all be fine, rather than we should continually invest in maintaining and upgrading our technology. You are right, Marshall. That is going to be a legitimate problem for a lot of companies. Even looking at TLS 1.2, in a lot of cases, by the time companies like Microsoft and Amazon started pushing people off to it, it wasn't even that, oh, well, we have non-compatible drivers. We have things that are stuck and still supporting just 1.1. It was just more of, well, we're not sure that 1.2 is going to work, and we really don't want to run any risk. It's like, you do realize that there are actual risks. There are actual vulnerabilities out there that could exploit TLS 1.1. Well, yeah, but TLS 1.2 is a real risk. Like, TLS 1.2 has been out for 8 years. By that point. By this point, TLS 1.2 has been out, I think it came out in about 2014, if I remember right. So we're talking about more than a decade since that one came out. And only in the past 2 or 3 years did we push TLS 1.2. We haven't even pushed 1.3 yet. Microsoft is providing it. So we're still probably 4 or 5 years away from, hey, we're going to start pushing you onto 1.3. So Marshall says it is a risk to them, in scare quotes. I appreciate the scare quotes, because they actually have to do something rather than sitting there and doing nothing. That's fair. I too enjoy doing nothing. But yeah, no, that is absolutely right. I think, unfortunately, you've nailed it, that in many cases this is application teams that just don't want to prioritize it, whether that's because you've got product owners who say, well, that's not going to sell me any more copies, any more licenses, or administrators who, I don't want to have to deal with the possible downsides, developers who, I've got my own stuff to work on, or frankly just people being lazy. Whatever that reason may be, yeah, they're going to default to, oh, it's too risky. And I think you're right. Risky in many cases is just a code word for, I just don't want to do it. And NanoDB says, that reminds me of something along these lines. Show me a server with many months of uptime, and I'll show you a server that's unpatched, especially if you're talking Windows. It's less common on Linux. I mean, you can do, at least if you're talking about server uptime and not service uptime, you can do a lot of patches live on Linux. But I accept your point. I believe your point. And this is also a key indicator of, this is why high availability is important, because it allows you to do that patching, and so your service can be up for longer, even if your servers are rebooting more often. So just a quick version of, hey, why might you want TLS 1.3? Just in case you need to be sold on it. Better performance. The full handshake is a little bit cheaper. So this is TLS 1.2. There were 7 steps involved in it. There's the initial ACK response. There's the key exchange and the cipher specs. There's the actual request and the response. And in TLS 1.3, so you have your ACK, and instead of a response acknowledging that, like your hello and your acknowledgement of the response, you instead just skip that out and say, hey, let me tell you what I've got, and then you figure it out on your side client, send the request, and I'll send you the response. So that can possibly shave off a decent amount of time for opening up those handshakes, especially if you're looking at a service that does not have a lot of long-running streams. So if your operational model is like a website that doesn't have sockets open and keeping them open for a client for a long time, if it is a lot of very quick open connection, close connection, open connection, close connection, those handshakes can add up over time. So this can save a bit of time. Additional security bits, simple and stronger cipher suites. So, we do have some decent reasons for looking at TLS 1.3. Should you move your company over to TLS 1.3? I don't know. It doesn't hurt. I would say that in general, it doesn't hurt. But you do have to make sure that your protocols that the protocol is supported in your drivers, in your servers, in your software. So SQL Server did not support it prior to 2025, which means that no, you couldn't do a full switch to TLS 1.3. But that doesn't mean you can't do it on your web server. It doesn't mean you can only be one type of TLS version and that's it. Your computer has support for multiple TLS versions. Your servers are going to have support for multiple versions. That's the whole point of the key exchange. And because that says, hey, here are the valuable ciphers that I'm willing to use. Here are the viable protocols that I understand. Your browser is going to be able to support these newer versions of TLS, considering that newer is still several years old. So by this point, a lot of software is going to be able to support it, but this is where there should be testing, and this is tech debt. Congratulations. This is tech debt. Just deal with it. All right. That was my Linux support. The happy spot. Some database engine improvements. Time-bound extended event sessions stop automatically after the specific time elapses. I like that a lot. One thing that, you look at extended events and you say, these are awesome. I can collect information, especially if I'm debugging. If I'm trying to figure out why in the world is this thing slow at 2 p.m.? What's running at 2 p.m.? Nobody knows. Okay, let's run an extended event session at around 2 p.m. and see what it picks up. But historically, you've had to either use a ring buffer that has a certain amount of memory before it overwrites, or you're writing to a file that could get large. You might have like a scheduled task to start and stop your extended events jobs. This feels better. This gives you an idea of, I'm going to run this thing. I want it to run for 6 hours. I don't want to have to come back after 6 hours and manually do anything. I just want it to stop, and that way I can collect the information. I can peruse it at my own time in my own way. Cardinality estimation feedback for expressions, cache persistence. So it learns from repeated query patterns to pick better row estimates and plans. And with persistence, that learning will survive restarts and failovers. So that's kind of interesting. I think this last one for cardinality estimation feedback for expressions, I'm going to want to wait to see it in practice before I say, hey, this is awesome, or, ooh, this is terrible. I get the feeling this is going to be one of those things where it'll work great 40% of the time. It'll work okay somewhere between 20 and 45% of the time. And it's probably going to hurt somebody in some circumstances some percentage of the time. So that's where I want to see how many situations can we run into where it doesn't help, where it actively hurts query operations. Analytics, use my favorite word, Polybase. Polybase now supports managed identity communications to Microsoft Azure Blob Storage and Azure Data Lake Storage. as of SQL Server 2022, meaning everything prior to Friday with RC0 of SQL Server 2025, you had to use a SAS token in order to communicate with your blob storage or data lake storage Gen 2 instances. So if I wanted to read data from a blob storage account, I needed to create a shared access signature token, and I needed to give that an expiration time. I needed to collect what the key is for it, et cetera, et cetera. SAS tokens are great. I like them a lot. You can make them quite valuable. The issue with SAS tokens is, in a perfect world, a SAS token is ephemeral. It is supposed to last a short amount of time and then expire. Where the idea is, even if an attacker does have access to your SAS token, that it's not going to last that long. It might last a couple hours, a few hours, maybe a day. But then it's supposed to expire and you get a new SAS token. So these tokens are supposed to be fairly ephemeral, not quite as much as like a JSON web token where JOTs are supposed to be extremely rapid. Like you get 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, one call. Whereas SAS tokens are, I would normally scale them in the hours. But the difficulty with Polybase is that if you wanted to change your SAS token, you would need to drop your external table, drop your external data source, drop your database scoped credential, create a new database scoped credential, recreate your external data source, recreate your external tables. And if you have a lot of tables, you have to script that out. You can script it out. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and claim that this is some onerous task that is impossible for a human to do, but it is extra effort. It is extra work. And so I think what most people would do, and admittedly, what I have done in my own personal versions when I've given Polybase related talks, is I have a SAS token that's going to last for decades because I don't want to have to remember to recreate a SAS token each time because I'm going to start presenting and I'm going to forget that, oh yeah, I needed to do that thing, and then it'll fail, and then I say, well, golly, I don't know what's going on, and then afterwards I figure out, oh wait, I needed to refresh the SAS token. So that, I think, is what a lot of Polybase users ran into, and being able to specify, we're just going to use a managed identity. I think that's nice. I think that is going to help out a lot. And I'm actually going to drop the link to, if you're interested in what it's going to take for connecting with a managed identity from Polybase. Here's the part that's going to be a little rough, at least if you're using on-prem. SQL Server enabled by Azure Arc. So this is using Microsoft Entra managed identities. So this is, or Microsoft Intra managed identities. This is not local Active Directory. This is not using an Active Directory account. It's not using a GMSA, a group managed service account. This is only using Intra managed identities. And so if you're using this on your SQL Server on-premises instance, you will need to pay for Azure Arc to make your SQL Server enabled by Azure Arc. And then there's an update to the registry where you can specify your storage endpoint, either your data lake or your storage endpoint. That's kind of interesting. And then identity equals your managed identity. So you don't have to have a key. You don't have a password. One of the major parts of managed identities is that you don't have passwords, or at least you don't have to know what the password is. The managed identity is an application promise that, yes, this application is allowed to access some resources because it knows of this managed identity, and we have granted that managed identity these things. So it is a way of making it simpler for us to specify what permissions we want to grant, and also makes it so that we don't have to worry about handing around SAS tokens and SAS token expiration. Because we don't have a specified key or a secret or any type of information that will change in here, the managed identity name isn't going to change, which means that you don't have to drop the external tables, drop the external data source, drop the database scope connection, and then re-add database scope connection, external data source, external tables in order to maintain security. So it's not too bad. You can still use shared access signature. Like in my case, for example, because I'm not going to have an Azure Arc enabled SQL Server instance, first, I'm running on Linux. Second, I don't want to pay extra money for that, not for my own personal use. So I'm going to continue using shared access signatures. But if you are in a circumstance where having an Azure Arc enabled SQL Server instance makes sense, if that extra cost is worth it, if getting the management plane capabilities from Arc, or the ability to run like Azure Defender or some of the other vulnerability management options that are available in Azure on your on-premises instances, okay, cool. That seems reasonable. And that would allow you to use managed identities. So that's pretty neat. It's not, I don't think everybody's going to use it. I think it'll probably be a relatively smaller percentage of people who, or companies that do use it, simply because you would have to use both Polybase and Azure Arc. And I don't know what the overlap is of companies that actively use both. All right. There are a couple of changes here. There are some notes on the regular expressions. Replace and substring now support lob types, which is interesting. Being able to scan large object with regex, I'm sure that's going to be slow, but I think this is a perfectly reasonable thing to expect from SQL Server for regular expressions. I would expect, yes, it'll be slow. It'll be scans of data. There's not much that the optimizer can do about it. But it's also kind of the point of having your regular expression text search is I need to be able to search through text, not just a few lines of text, but an entire document. So that's nice. And the regular expression like is now sargeable, which is good. So that's going to be closer in performance, I believe, to your classic like command. And I know when regular expressions first came out, I know Brent Ozar had a blog post on how slow they are. So I think this is one mechanism that will hopefully make that a bit faster. We'll see how well it works. We'll see how effective it is at this point. Hopefully it's nicer. When it comes to security, SQL Server Agent linked servers, these two things default to mandatory encryption, and they're using TDS8 and TLS 1.3. This goes back to the point that I was saying that, hey, SQL Server is finally starting to push you in the direction of TLS 1.3. Well, they're also pushing you in the direction of Tabular Data Stream 8, which came out in SQL Server 2022 and is a more secure version of TDS. So we're seeing more functionality after a version of SQL Server fully support this. If you wanted to jump on the TDS 8.0 bandwagon back in 2022, you found out pretty quickly that there are a bunch of built-in SQL Server features that are not supported. And so, that made it difficult to make that switch. Same thing with TLS 1.3. Now we're seeing more capability. We're seeing more things that are available. We can also use TLS 1.3 for availability groups, for failover clusters, for replication, and for log shipping. Those things also support TDS 8.0. So that's nice. Replication defaults to OLADB for inter-instance communication and does enforce TLS 1.3. Fabric mirroring was a hot topic in the last year, and the ability to use Resource Governor with Fabric mirroring is kind of nice because you don't want your data lake or your data warehouse mirror to soak up all of your resources. So I think all in all, pretty decent release candidate 0. I do expect at least one more RC, maybe 2, depending, we have like I was saying at the near the top of the hour, we probably have just enough time to squeeze in a second release candidate, RC2. We almost certainly will get an RC1. I would be shocked if we got no RC1, but there might be an RC2. There might not be. I think it's going to be hard to tell. My other topic for the night. Got about 10 minutes left. I want to talk just a bit about this. This is the Stack Overflow 2025 Developer Survey. And so this survey came out recently. We hit on it at the very end of the last episode of Shop Talk, where I had an article that covered generative AI, I don't know, I guess willingness to believe the results and or happiness with the products. And we saw that as more developers have tried it out, the happiness has dropped a bit. I think a lot of this is realizing that the grandiose promises weren't really coming true. But the Stack Overflow survey has it's a pretty broad subset of users of what is still a very popular website for developers. So I think there's still a lot of interesting information that you can glean from it. There is always the caveat that this will overplay certain languages, certain groups of developers, underplay certain languages, certain groups of developers. So I would not treat this as a single holistic view of the entire population of developers or of developer adjacent people, but instead as a quick peek at a certain subset of users. And just taking a quick peek at, speaking of quick peeks, who uses Stack Overflow? Mostly developers. So you can see that there were roughly 49,000 people who filled out this survey, which is a pretty decent population. But about 3/4 of users are professional developers, which, if I remember right, this is down from this is up from prior years. Previously, you had more people who were not developers. They were learning how to code. They were hobbyists, etc. I think a lot of those people have moved over to language models. So I think that a lot of those people, instead of being Stack Overflow-driven developers, are Claude-driven developers or Perplexity-driven developers. Age range, you are seeing there is still actually a pretty decent skew low. 25 to 34, 35 to 44 are your two ranges. That's your roughly the median is somewhere in this area. So you're looking at probably like just around 35 years old as your median Stack Overflow user. If you look just at the professional developers, they skew a little bit younger. Learning to code obviously is going to skew very young. Professionals using AI doesn't look like it's very different. Learners using AI, etc. Country, U.S., Germany being second place is kind of interesting for Stack Overflow respondents. So you'll notice that 35,000 people responded to this one. All right, I will scroll just a little bit because I want to get to languages. So let me actually scroll up technology. So let's look at some of the most popular technologies. This is what languages have you done extensive development work in recently? JavaScript, HTML, CSS, SQL, Python, shell scripting, TypeScript, Java, C#. Seeing C# here, I think that's a little bit down, but you can kind of see, JavaScript is where a lot of development is at. A lot of front-end development is in JavaScript. HTML and CSS, I know that there are professional CSS developers who do a fantastic job and treat it as an interesting language. I think for a lot of us, it's a thing that we have to do, and to figure it out, we go look at Stack Overflow, copy and paste what somebody else has done, and then hope that it works. And once I get it working, never think about it again. I'm pretty sure that's how most people do CSS. R, under 5%. VB.net is still above 4%. Considering that VB.net has been out of support for, I think, the entire decade, I'm pretty sure Microsoft officially kicked VB.net to the can a decade ago. It was like, or in the prior decade, I think it was like 2018, 2019. And for anybody who's saying, oh, well, what about your languages, Kevin? Shut up. Shut up, shut up, shut up. That is my official response. If you add all of these together, it is above VB. Get rid of Ada. So 1.5, 1.4, 1.3, 1.2, add all of that up. That's above Visual Basic, so I'll take that. It is not above Visual Basic plus VBA. So again, I refer back to my prior statement of shut up. Okay, as far as databases go, this is a case where, again, you're going to be focused on a particular subset of developers. Which databases have you done extensive development work in? Postgres, MySQL, SQLite. All of those make a lot of sense because they're open source databases that are developer heavy, especially MySQL or MySQL, however you want to pronounce it. I am old, and still I pronounce it the way that they used to pronounce it, as opposed to the way that people pronounce it today. SQL Server is the biggest of the major players. You can see Oracle is like a third of SQL Server, but this is where I get to, this is not a survey of utilization. This is a survey of what developers who use Stack Overflow are searching for or are working with. A lot of people who are Oracle developers aren't spending a lot of time in Stack Overflow. They have their own mechanism. They have their own search mechanisms and their own methods of getting information. So for that reason, I would not say, oh, well, look, Oracle's got a third of the market share of SQL Server. That's not true at all. So just keep that in mind as you're going through all of this. Now, DB2 being at 2% actually probably is about right. When it comes to cloud development, which cloud platforms, containerization or orchestration tools, package managers, build tools, infrastructures, code solutions do you work with? I'm actually surprised NPM is not higher because you had 60-something% of people who said that they spent a lot of time in JavaScript. I'm surprised more of them weren't using Node. You have 50-some% of people who were using Python, but only 40% used pip. And I'm looking down for Conda, not seeing Conda. Interesting. Are we saying that 15% of people are not updating their packages? Actually, that's probably right. Speaking of Node, web frameworks and technologies, Node and React. I'm shocked. I shouldn't be shocked. Again, I need to tell myself the same thing that I just told all of you folks. This is not a survey of who is using what. This is a survey of what the people querying Stack Overflow use. So jQuery, still very popular. Node and React do not shock me at all. Those are, I've noticed those are at the top. Angular, the only reason why it shocks me is because Angular really pulled away. Oracle devs prefer searching with Gopher and Veronica. That is a deep cut, and I appreciate every bit of it. The Kermit protocol is for Oracle developers only. All right. Dev IDEs. VS Code dominating, which I think is also true. It's true in general. Visual Studio Code. Microsoft has, they're not making any money on it, but they really are dominating the IDE space. It is funny that Vim is number 5 on this list. Probably the funniest bit is of the 24% of people that they regularly used, probably like half of them know how to exit Vim. I do. I know at least 3 ways of exiting Vim, so I got that going for me. All right. Community platforms, large language models. I'm seeing if there's anything else exciting in here. You can see there's a lot. There are a lot of questions. There are a lot of things that people ask about, talk about. And here is admired and desired. So extensive development and what do you want to work in? So let's see. Rust is the most admired. So 72% of people admire it, but 29% desire it. And let me see what that means. Actually, I'm not sure exactly what it means by desired. It feels like, shouldn't it be, wouldn't you want both of these numbers to be high? And yet, nobody's got high numbers. So, I don't know. This is, I mean, yeah, it's a cool name. It's a cool term, but I'm not sure what this is trying to tell me, because normally this type of a dot plot, of the 2-dot plot, is like positive and negative affinities, or from here to there. Oh, well, 39.3% of people used it last year and 56% use it today. That's typically how you would use this type of a plot. I don't know what desired means in this case. So I don't know if it's good to have a wide spread, if it's good to have a narrow spread, if it's good just to have a big number. Like Gleam is at 70.8%, but nobody knows what Gleam is. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. For databases, same story. Unfortunately, desired and admired. Yeah, you can look at it and, all right, well, DuckDB has a very high admired rate, but what does that mean for anybody? I don't know. So kind of disappointed with that visual, this whole series of visuals, because I don't know that it makes sense. All right. So I'm just going to keep going down. Let's see. Worked with versus want to work with. Okay, a lot of people are writing in PowerShell. If you are a PowerShell developer, a lot of people want to use TypeScript or JavaScript or HTML. You want to use HTML and CSS? Okay. C#, I can get that. Python, I can understand that. SQL, yeah. You know, I get this. I guess this is a lot of, hey, if I use this particular language, what neat thing do I want? Like, what have I heard that people find exciting? But you can tell I can't select a lot of these items in here, so it's hard for me to see. It's a neat looking visual, but it doesn't actually help much. When it comes to databases, what percentage is this? 3,149 people using SQL Server want to use Postgres. Okay, but then how many people using Postgres want to use SQL Server? That's, I don't know. Some of these visuals kind of suck. It looks neat until you start trying to make sense of it, and then you say, what does this do? What even is all of this? And speaking of what even is all of this, that's it for tonight. We are at the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody, for checking in. Glad we were able to put this on. I know Mala, unfortunately, wasn't able to make it tonight. Hoping that Mike would be able to, but it looks like he was also out. Tracy is still on top secret missions for the U.S. government. She has joined with B.A. Baracus and a couple of other people, and is currently going through Los Angeles. Now, if you have a tough enough job and you're willing to pay, you might just be able to get help from them. So go check that out if you will. Nonetheless, I think we're going to wrap things up for tonight. And remember, tomorrow night we actually do have a meeting. It is building a robust data foundation for AI success. You can find this at meetup.com/tripass. Tomorrow night it is going to be Marilyn. I'm going to have to figure out how to pronounce Marilyn's last name and also Miracle. So I'm going to have to figure out how to pronounce their last names tomorrow. So we're going to figure that out tomorrow. Nonetheless, glad to have you here tonight. Hopefully you had a great evening, and we'll hopefully see you tomorrow. But until we do see each other in a future TriPass meeting, take care.